Let me tell you something about human behavior that most people get backwards. We assume that the people who pull away from us, the ones we label avoidant, are simply not paying attention, that they're numb, disconnected, unaware of the damage they're doing. And I'm here to tell you that could not be further from the truth. Avoidant individuals are not unaware, they are hyper aware. Their nervous system is running a background program at all times, constantly scanning for one specific data point. Is this relationship still guaranteed? As long as you keep chasing, keep explaining yourself, keep showing up with more love than you're receiving, that program runs quietly. It doesn't need to activate. Why? Because your presence is confirmed. You've become, in their internal architecture, a fixed point, something they don't have to work for. But here's where it gets fascinating. The moment you reach your breaking point, and I mean the real one, not the performative one, not the one you announce and then abandon 3 days later, something shifts in the architecture of that relationship. You stop initiating, you stop over-functioning emotionally, you stop trying to earn a closeness that should have been freely given. And that shift, subtle as it may seem to you, is not subtle to them. It is loud, it is data. It is the single most threatening signal their attachment system can receive. Now, I want you to understand something about the human mind, because this is where the philosophy meets the psychology. We do not fear loss the way we think we do. We fear the loss of control over loss. An avoidant person can tolerate distance. In fact, they often manufacture it as long as they believe they are the one steering the ship. What they cannot tolerate, what genuinely destabilizes them, is discovering that the ship has started moving without their hand on the wheel. That's what your breaking point represents. It's not an emotional outburst to them, it's evidence. Evidence that the predictability they relied on, maybe even exploited, is no longer guaranteed. And a nervous system that has spent years avoiding vulnerability suddenly finds itself vulnerable in the one way it never accounted for, the possibility of actually losing you. This is the paradox I need you to sit with, because it's going to explain everything that comes next in this talk. Your withdrawal doesn't just create distance, it creates urgency. And urgency, for someone wired to avoid emotional exposure, is deeply uncomfortable, because urgency demands a response, and response demands vulnerability, and vulnerability is the very thing their entire pattern was built to protect them from. So when you feel that shift, when you finally stop performing the chase, understand what you have actually done. You haven't pushed them away. You've done something far more powerful. You've removed the illusion of certainty they were unconsciously depending on. And the moment that illusion breaks, their next move stops being a choice they make for you and starts being a reaction they make because of you. That is the turning point, not because you demanded change, but because your silence finally spoke a language their old patterns couldn't ignore. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that is the moment real truth enters a relationship. Not when we beg to be seen, but when we finally stop asking permission to matter. Now let's talk about what happens next. Because once that illusion of certainty breaks, once they feel the ground shift beneath them, something predictable begins to unfold. And I want you to pay very close attention here, because this is the part most people misread, misinterpret, and ultimately let fool them all over again. The attention comes back, not in a grand way, not usually with an apology, not with accountability, not with the depth you've been starving for. It comes back small, a good morning text after 3 weeks of silence, a like on a photo you posted timed suspiciously close to when you stopped checking your phone, every 5 minutes waiting for them. A memory brought up out of nowhere. Remember that trip we took? Dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water, just to see what ripples back. Here's what I need you to understand about this moment, because it's psychological and it's almost mathematical in its predictability. This resurgence of attention is rarely about you. It's about them. It is not remorse, it is regulation. Their nervous system, having registered the threat of real loss, is now searching for the fastest, lowest cost way to reduce its own anxiety. And the cheapest currency they have, the thing that costs them nothing but relieves the pressure, instantly is a small calculated dose of attention aimed directly at you. Think about that. Think about how efficient that is from a purely self-protective standpoint. They don't have to change. They don't have to sit with why you reached your breaking point in the first place. They don't have to examine the pattern. All they have to do is reach out just enough to pull your nervous system back into alignment with theirs, just enough to make you wonder, just enough to make you doubt the boundary you worked so hard to build. This is what I call the breadcrumb effect, and I want you to internalize this. Breadcrumbs are not a bridge. They were never designed to be a bridge. A bridge is built with intention, with consistency, with follow-through. A breadcrumb is built with the opposite intention, the intention to give you just enough to keep walking toward them without ever requiring them to walk toward you. And here's the deeper truth, the one that separates surface level advice from real transformation. The arrival of attention is not evidence of depth. It is evidence of detection. They notice the shift. That's all it tells you. It doesn't tell you they've grown. It doesn't tell you they understand what almost happened. It tells you their radar is still working. And right now, that radar is pointed at restoring stability, not restoring intimacy. So when this moment comes, and for many of you, it already has, I want you to ask yourself one question, because this question will save you months, maybe years of confusion. Is this effort or is this maintenance? Effort builds something new. Maintenance simply protects what already exists from falling apart. One requires transformation. The other requires nothing but timing. Because here's the truth underneath all of this. The truth I need you to carry out of this room today. Attention that only appears when you pull away was never about honoring you. It was about controlling the distance between you. And real love, the kind you deserve, does not wait for your silence to prove your worth. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Because after that first wave of attention lands, after the breadcrumb has been dropped, something else begins to happen. Something most people never see coming because it doesn't look like what they expect. They start testing you. I don't mean testing in some dramatic, obvious way. I mean something far more subtle, far more calculated, even if it's happening below the level of conscious awareness. Because remember what we established, this isn't someone who's suddenly self-aware, suddenly enlightened, suddenly ready to do the work. This is a nervous system that detected a threat and is now trying to verify one thing, and one thing only: is this real, or will it pass like it always has before? So watch what happens. A comment that seems careless, almost designed to provoke a reaction out of you. A joke about someone else they've been talking to, dropped casually into conversation. Watch closely for your response. A check-in that seems warm on the surface. How have you been? But is really a probe, a temperature reading, an attempt to measure whether your withdrawal has teeth or whether it's just another cycle in a pattern they've learned to wait out. This is not manipulation in the cartoonish sense most people imagine. I want to be precise here because precision matters. This is a self-protective mechanism refined over years, sometimes decades, of learning that emotional exposure is dangerous and that certainty is safer than connection. They are not thinking, how do I hurt this person? They're thinking, often unconsciously, how do I find out if I still have access without having to risk being vulnerable to get it? And here's the philosophical core of what's happening, the part I really want to land with you today. Testing behavior is the language of someone who has never learned to simply ask. Think about how much energy, how much strategy, how much emotional gymnastics it takes to test someone rather than to simply say, I'm scared I've lost you and I don't know what to do about it. That sentence, 11 words, could resolve in seconds what months of testing behavior never will. But that sentence requires something the avoidant pattern was built to avoid: direct emotional risk. So instead, they probe, they watch, they wait to see if you react the old way, if you re-engage, over-explain, rush to reassure them, because if you do, the test confirms what their nervous system wanted to believe. Nothing has actually changed. The door is still open. The old dynamic is still intact. But here's what I need you to understand, and I need you to really absorb this. Your response to the test is the actual answer they're looking for, not your words, your pattern. Do you still collapse under old dynamics? Or have you actually become someone new in the space you created? This is the moment integrity gets built, not in the leaving, but in the holding. Anyone can walk away in anger. Far fewer can stay calm, stay grounded, and simply not perform the old role when the invitation to perform it reappears, because ultimately the test was never really about them figuring out who you are. It was an opportunity for you to find out who you've become. And that more than any apology they could offer is the answer that actually matters. Now let's go deeper, because underneath everything we've talked about so far, the detection, the breadcrumbs, the testing, there is a war happening inside them that most people never fully grasp. And I want to be very clear, this is not an excuse. Understanding is not the same as excusing. But if you want to truly free yourself from confusion, you have to understand the mechanism. You cannot out-argue a pattern you don't understand. Here it is. Two systems are firing inside them at the exact same time. And those two systems are in direct conflict with each other. The first is the fear of loss, the primal, almost animal recognition that something valuable is slipping away. The second is the fear of closeness, the deeply conditioned belief, often built in childhood, long before you ever entered the picture, that intimacy itself is dangerous. That being fully seen, fully needed, fully depended upon leads to engulfment, disappointment, or pain. Think about what that actually means for a moment. The very thing that could resolve their fear of losing you, leaning in, being vulnerable, choosing closeness, is the exact same thing their nervous system has spent a lifetime learning to avoid. They are not choosing between you and someone else. They are caught between two threats, both aimed at the same nervous system, both demanding opposite responses. Move toward you, and the fear of engulfment activates, let you go, and the fear of loss activates. There is no comfortable position, only oscillation. This is why you see the hot and cold behavior that confuses so many people, that makes them question their own sanity. One day, warmth, depth, presence. The next day, distance so cold it feels like the warmth never existed. And I want you to understand that inconsistency is not a reflection of how they feel about you. It is a reflection of which fear is winning in that particular moment. Here's the deeper truth. The philosophical core I want you to take with you. What looks like mixed signals is actually a consistent internal conflict, expressing itself inconsistently on the outside. It's not chaos. It's a pattern. Just one operating from a divided internal system rather than a unified one. And this is where I need you to make a critical distinction, because your peace depends on it. You are not responsible for resolving that internal war. You did not create it, and you cannot fix it through more patience, more understanding, more emotional labor on your part. That war existed long before you, shaped by attachment wounds formed years before you ever said, hello, You can be the safest, most secure, most emotionally generous person on this earth, and it will not be enough because the conflict isn't about your worthiness. It's about their unresolved relationship with closeness itself. So when you witness this push and pull, I want you to reframe what you're seeing. You're not watching indecision about you. You are watching two competing fears fight for control of a single nervous system, and you happen to be standing in the crossfire. Your job was never to win that war for them. Your job is to decide how long you're willing to stand on a battlefield that was never yours to fight. Now, for some of you, something else may happen, something rarer, something that when it occurs can feel almost disorienting in its intensity, because after all, the distance, after all the testing, after all the internal war we just talked about, there comes a moment where the wall actually comes down, even if just for a moment. This is the grand gesture, the vulnerable moment. And I want to be honest with you about something most people in this space won't tell you. It's real. It's not always manipulation. It's not always strategy. Sometimes when the fear of loss finally overwhelms the fear of closeness, when the nervous system runs out of other options, something breaks through, an apology that actually acknowledges what happened instead of deflecting it, a conversation that goes further than any conversation you've had before, a moment of eye contact, of honesty, of, I don't want to lose you spoken, not as leverage, but as truth. And here's what I need you to understand about this moment, because it is profound. This is often the first time an avoidant person has allowed themselves to be truly exposed. Not performing strength, not maintaining the image of independence they've built their entire identity around, just exposed. And for someone whose whole architecture was built around avoiding exactly that state, this is not a small thing. This is, in that moment, an act of genuine courage. I want you to honor that. I want you to recognize it for what it is. And this is where wisdom has to override emotion. I need you to understand what this moment is not. It is not proof of transformation. It is not evidence that the pattern has been resolved. It is a glimpse, a single frame pulled from a much longer film. And one frame, no matter how beautiful, does not tell you how the story ends. Here's the philosophical truth I want you to sit with. Emotion is not evidence of change. Emotion is evidence of capacity. It tells you they are capable of vulnerability, not that vulnerability is now their default state. A single vulnerable moment tells you the door exists. It does not tell you whether they intend to walk through it again and again and again on the ordinary days when there's no crisis forcing them to. This is where so many people get hurt, not by the coldness, but by the warmth. Because it's the warmth that convinces them the work is done. They mistake the presence of one honest moment for the absence of the entire pattern that came before it, and so they rush back in fully before any evidence exists that this moment was the beginning of something sustained rather than the exception that proves the rule. So if this happens to you, if you receive that rare, vulnerable, breathtaking moment of honesty, I want you to hold two truths at the same time, because that is what maturity actually looks like. Let yourself witness it. Let yourself acknowledge that it mattered. And at the very same time, refuse to build your future on a single moment that has not yet been matched by a pattern, because real change doesn't announce itself in one powerful sentence. It reveals itself in 100 ordinary ones that follow. And now we arrive at the question that actually matters, not what they said, not what they felt in that one vulnerable moment, not even the war we described between their fear of loss and their fear of closeness. What actually matters, the only thing that ever truly matters in the end, is this. What do they do once the crisis passes? Because here's what I need you to understand about human behavior at the deepest level. People are extraordinary in emergencies. Give someone the threat of real loss, and you will often see their best self show up, attentive, honest, present, even courageous. That's not hard to produce. Fear is a powerful motivator, and it can manufacture behavior that looks exactly like love for a short period of time. What's hard, what's actually rare, is what happens after the fear fades. When the crisis is no longer forcing the performance, when there's no more risk of losing you because you've stayed or you've softened or you've let them back in. That is the real test, not the apology, not the grand gesture, not the breadcrumb or the testing or even the vulnerable moment we just talked about. The real test is Tuesday. It's 3 months from now on an ordinary evening with no crisis on the horizon. Are they still doing the work? Or did the moment you stopped being a flight risk, the moment certainty returned, the old pattern quietly returned with it? This is where I want you to internalize something that will change how you see every relationship. For the rest of your life, behavior under threat is not character. Behavior under comfort is character. Anyone can rise to meet a crisis. Character is revealed in what a person does when nothing is demanding it of them anymore. So here's what I want you to actually watch for. Not what they say when they're scared of losing you, but what they build when they're not. Do they initiate connection without being prompted by your distance? Do they sit with discomfort instead of retreating from it? Do they choose vulnerability on an ordinary Tuesday with no stakes attached, simply because it's who they're becoming? That is transformation. Everything else, every gesture born purely from the fear of loss, is simply damage control. And here's the deeper truth underneath everything we've covered today. The thread that ties the detection, the breadcrumbs, the testing, the internal war, and the vulnerable moment all together, their next move was never really the point. Their next move only reveals what already existed inside them. It doesn't create character. It exposes it. So I want to leave you with this, because this is the truth. I believe you came here to hear, whether you knew it or not. You do not need to become a detective, decoding every text, every silence, every flicker of attention, trying to determine what it means. You only need to watch what happens after the fear fades. That single piece of information will tell you everything the rest of this speech has been building toward. Because in the end, the breaking point was never really about them. It was the moment you finally started asking a better question. Not will they change, but will I ever again mistake fear for love? And once you know the difference, no one can ever confuse you again. So let's bring this all together, because I want you to leave this room today carrying something more than information. I want you to leave carrying clarity. We started with a shift, a moment where you stopped chasing, stopped over-explaining, stopped performing a role that was never yours to perform alone. And we watched what happened next, step by step, because none of it was random. The attention that returned wasn't love, it was regulation. The testing that followed wasn't curiosity, it was verification. The hot and cold behavior wasn't confusion about you, it was a war between two fears that had nothing to do with your worth. The vulnerable moment when it came wasn't proof of transformation, it was proof of capacity. And the only thing that was ever going to tell you the truth, the only thing that ever tells anyone the truth, was what happened next on the ordinary days, when no one was watching and nothing was at stake. Here's what I want you to understand. Standing here right now, before you walk out of this room and back into your life, you spent so long asking, what do I need to do to make them see me? What do I need to change, fix, soften, or sacrifice to finally be chosen? And I'm telling you, that was never the right question. It was never about earning your way into safety with someone who hadn't yet learned how to offer it. The real question, the one this entire talk has been building toward, is so much simpler than that. Not will they change, not was that moment real, not what does this text mean, The real question is, what do I do with what I now know? Because once you understand the pattern, once you can see the detection, the breadcrumb, the test, the war, the glimpse, and the aftermath for exactly what they are, you are no longer at the mercy of confusion. Confusion was the thing keeping you stuck. Clarity is the thing that sets you free. And I want to leave you with this, because I believe it's the truest thing I can offer you today. Your breaking point was never a moment of weakness. It was the first moment of honesty in a dynamic that had been built on your silence. It was not the end of your capacity to love. It was the beginning of your refusal to abandon yourself in order to keep loving someone who hadn't, yet learned how to stay. You do not need them to change in order for you to heal. You do not need an apology to move forward. You do not need certainty about their next move, because you now understand something far more powerful than prediction. You understand pattern. So whatever their next move is, whether it's growth or retreat or another cycle of the same old dance, I want you to walk out of here knowing this one truth above all others. The moment you stop breaking yourself to be understood by someone who won't do, the work to understand you is the same moment you finally become impossible to lose, because you've stopped waiting to be found and started becoming someone who was never really missing at all. That was you all along. Go be her. Go be him. Go be whole.